Hello and welcome to Property Matters. I'm Stephen Galpin, and today we're going to be having our monthly look at the legal matters surrounding the property market, and helping us with that is Chris Barry, Business Development Director of Thomas Legal. Welcome to you, Chris.
Thank you, Stephen.
I understand that you've got two main things on your mind at the moment, one positive, one negative. So shall we start off with the positive?
Yeah, absolutely. When I came and spoke in August, I talked about transaction times becoming quite a bit slower. And this happens every year during the summer for lots of reasons, but mainly because the process from start to finish is still so manual. It is determined by human intervention. And it's a perfect storm, really, of lots of people throughout the different parts of the process being off for school holidays, together with lots of clients wanting to complete during the school holidays. And that every year means that there is a delayed period between agreeing a transaction and exchange of contracts.
What's a typical time delay now?
The time delay lengthens out by a good couple of weeks in August, but the time typically from memorandum of sale to exchange of contracts is about 140 days, which is obviously quite a long period of time.
That's quite a serious delay.
But the time delay as a percentage, it actually isn't that significant. But if you're a client that wants to get over the line quickly and you've got to wait another 2 weeks, that is quite a long period of time, obviously. But the good news is in September, there are two big parts of the process which we have evidence to suggest has sped up. Obviously, we have the point that in September, lots of people are back to work and lots of clients are focusing on now Christmas, not school holidays, which prevents a lot of room for tighter transactions and puts pressure on the next milestone. But what I guess has been quite pivotal is the Building Safety Act that came into force in February 22, but actually started to rear its head in the summer of 22, caused a lot of delays to the process because anybody buying in a building that is over 5 stories or 11 metres was subject to this act. And it's obviously meant to protect clients who are buying in buildings that could have fire safety defects or anything of that sort.
So all this was brought in post Grenfell?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay.
And what it did is the legislation was brought in without much consultation to property professionals. So lots of lenders got quite nervous quite quickly and started transferring a lot of the risk to the lawyers involved who are representing the banks and representing the clients. And all the lawyers dropped out of the process, leaving only a few to do this stuff. There are so many other parties involved when purchasing a property in a block above 5 stories or 11 metres, landlords, managing agents, leaseholders. So there are other parts of this process where people didn't quite understand what was actually needed. Now, what we've evidenced in the last sort of 4 to 6 weeks is that people that have done these lots now over the last 20 months have become more familiar with the process. And what that has meant is, as a lawyer that's acting for the buyer in a building that is subject to the Building Safety Act, they're now getting information back quite quickly. And this has a huge impact. So typically in the past, we talked about the 140-day average to buy a property. That's very much an average. To buy something in a block can take 6, 7, 8 months in some instances. And we're seeing that drop right back down now to more like 6 weeks closer to what is the national average.
Okay.
So it's a huge impact.
Tell me, Chris, I see, well, we have an abundance of high-rise buildings around here, and I see a trend where freeholders are selling off their ground rent investment factor of that freehold, just then being left with the freehold. Doesn't it make that freehold almost worthless now?
Yeah.
And perhaps it's, rather than an asset, it's becoming a liability. And so where will our freeholders go with that? What will they do?
Yeah, I mean, all of the value in the freehold came from the ground rent, and this is why it's become such a popular investment vehicle for pensions, etc., to come in and buy these things. So once we get rid of that benefit, what are you left with, as you quite rightly say, is pretty much a liability. You're left holding something that's only going to cost you money. There is a small benefit in that the people buying it get some control, and you would love to hope that those people are people who are living in the building. But with that comes great responsibility.
Yes. And not an easy job to control, really. If you're not a qualified professional, owning a freehold can be quite an onerous obligation, can't it?
Yes, yeah, it can be. You become responsible not only for your own lease and what's demised within that, but almost the responsibility of everyone in the building, and you need to play a part in that. So there is a time responsibility, there's a compliance responsibility, a financial one. So there is lots of things to consider if you're going to be thinking about taking this on.
It's not the utopia we all hope for, is it?
No. And you know, if people that were doing this 10 years ago were benefiting from acquiring the ground rent, and that's not the case anymore.
Okay, well, let's move on to one of your negative thoughts, and that's the negative press surrounding the upcoming budget, which we're all a bit nervous about. And I'm guessing that this is going to see people put their purchases on hold, especially at the upper end of the market, and until all this becomes clear what we're going to have inflicted upon us. Am I right?
Yeah, it seems to be affecting the highest end of the market, top end of the single millions, sometimes into the double-digit millions. But what feels like, or what we're seeing is happening at the moment, is people are paying for legal fees, for surveys, for all the different things that they need to do to psychologically and financially commit to a purchase, getting all the way to what is nearly financial commitment, which is exchange of contracts, and then deciding actually there is so much negative press surrounding this upcoming budget, which is now the end of November, that they're deciding to not go ahead at all. So they're not talking about necessarily pausing this purchase. They're thinking they don't want to buy anymore at that level. And that is a huge concern, because what we're seeing is a dramatic decrease in property values at that end of the market.
Well, I mean, it's almost a double whammy, isn't it? Not only are the in and out costs of buying and selling property huge these days, chances are, if the press is to be believed, it's going to get even worse.
Yes.
But I just flipping back to your original talk on conveyancing times, is there a direct relation between the amount of time it takes to convey a property as against the dropout rate of transactions? Do they both rise together?
They do. They correlate almost exactly. The longer a transaction takes, the more likely it is to fall apart. And that may or may not necessarily be directly related to the vendor. Lots of people commit to the market. Some test the water, but most actually want to sell. But very much, especially in this market, depends on the buyer, because you can imagine committing to a property purchase. And we had a live example of this last week, where somebody had thought, right, okay, I'm paying a really good price for this property and I'm very happy with it. It's exactly what I want. But more stock is coming to the market every day. And because the stock outstrips the demand, they're coming on at cheaper prices. So especially people that want to sell pre-budget.
Yes.
So they're looking at Rightmove every day, getting notifications for something in their search criteria, thinking, hang on, I can get exactly the same round the corner for either less money, or it's a little bit more than what I wanted, a little bit more than what I need. Why don't I drop out of this one? And the problem with the UK house buying process is they're not on the hook financially until they exchange contracts.
No, I think I think there's two things here. I live in a building where everybody is very concerned about values, the fairly high value properties. I got three things to say about that. One, the value is only dropping if you sell. So if you don't need to sell, don't, and then you'll avoid any losses. And as we've seen over the years, the property market always comes around sooner or later, sooner picks up. But of course, when there is a pause in the market, a depression of number of sales, then you're never going to be able to cope with the man that is desperate to sell, therefore reduces the price to such a level that it cannot not sell, setting the value. And where we have these valuers who share the information, who syndicate their valuations, it has a ripple effect on everybody in terms of reducing the price. But again, I have to say, I think the advice is sit tight if you're in that situation. We'll never be able to stop the man who desperately needs to sell because he needs to sell.
Yeah, exactly that. Exactly. And one of the issues is the increasing level of stocks in the market for sure.
Yeah.
And we need to get rid of those people who are just testing the water. But last month I talked about valuers going out to properties and putting nil values on lots of properties, especially investment ones. It was causing an issue. We're seeing slightly less of that, which I thought was positive. But actually what we're seeing more of is values that are coming in 50% what the owner thinks it's worth. And that's almost worse, because we then got a registered value at half of what they think it is, whereas a nil value can almost be brushed off as.
Because it's not just the value of the property. You have to have in your mind that it's the lender's valuation of the property, i.e., he says the property is being put to me at £1 million. Well, actually, I need to feel safe that I can cash in my security. So therefore, that probably makes it 75% of that value. Then they want a market safety button, don't they? So, you can come down 50%.
Yes.
And it still actually be a correct and realistic valuation.
And the average dropout rate at the moment is just over 20%.
So that's quite high.
Yeah, but that's of deals that get agreed. If we're to listen to the statistics, just over 50% of properties don't sell at all. So that's actually quite a big chunk of properties initially go on the market to actually going through to completion.
Yes. Going back to the sellers packs, I can't remember now, 15 years ago. Do you think that would be something worthwhile bringing back?
Yeah, so there are lots of, there's a government department talking about it right now. Lots of tech companies coming to try and find a solution exactly like that. I've got a meeting with one next week, actually. The more information that somebody could get up front, the better. It only speeds up the process. The seller can do a lot of the work in advance, which is absolutely great. So for me, yes, absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
It would stop people putting their properties on the market just to test the market, and and even at the early stages of a property purchase, you're incurring costs. Your solicitor wants a deposit before they start the work, and then you're probably being asked to pay for searches and things like that. So, I mean, it can be quite penal for some people. It's not money that you can borrow easily. No. It has to be funded. So I think that'd be quite a good idea. I'd like to see them back. And I always felt a bit sorry for people at the time. The government were very keen to say this is a new business opportunity for a lot of people who set up their, seller pack businesses to provide the service, and then government just dropped it overnight, didn't they? Quite sad, really.
Yeah, the big difference between then and now is that we can make it more technologically advanced, can't we? So, I think there's lots of different parts to publicly available information, privately available information that can be pulled onto a portal or sorts to create what is essentially a passport to be able to pass through hands.
I mean, just talking on that subject, do you see much difference on the horizon of how conveyancing works? I mean, look, let's just take the process. You go to an agent, you see the property, you want to make an offer, you make your offer, and then you're off to your solicitors, right? Now that solicitor handles everything from, checking Environmental Agency, floodplain statistics, council searches, I suppose contaminated land searches, a whole myriad of things. Is that going to change? Are we not going to switch over to AI for that sort of thing?
Yeah, so there are about 6 searches in total. Nearly all of them are automated and almost instant. So that information, there are companies out there that have gathered all of this information already and can make it readily available for solicitors almost in real time. So huge advantage. The trouble is you're still waiting for the local authority search.
Right.
That is yet to be automated.
Are they the only ones that have opted out?
They're going through, but I worked out by the time that every local authority has been automated, I'll be long retired. So it could take a long time.
Okay. All right. Well, good. Okay. I think that explains that, and probably there's a bit of hope there if it's the more automated it gets. Now, I know that you have a view on price drops at the moment, and it is the most expensive properties that are dropping in price, and essentially over £1 million, I think, is the sort of level there. But of course, in London, it doesn't take much to find a property for £1 million, does it? And that ranges from anything to 1 million, 10 million, 15 million. So are the price drops sort of pro rata in those sort of brackets?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest price drop that was announced was £10 million as a price drop, which is astronomical. But the most common price drop is around 10%. And there are some harrowing stats coming out of some of the SW postcodes to suggest that property prices had dropped significantly. It wasn't actually the case. What had actually happened is the highest property values were decreasing, and the more prime, more core market was actually being quite resilient.
So it was the dear properties that were skewing the data.
Yeah,
Yeah.
precisely that, precisely that. And that is pretty much what we're seeing. I think if you are outside of London coming to market over £1 million, then the price drops are quite common. They're coming in quite thick and fast. If you're in London over £2 million, the same applies. But in London, between sort of 750 and 1.25 is still quite a solid market actually. And these, I guess, are either your family movers, in some instances first-time buyers. But yeah, there are still lots of properties that are still selling quite quickly and selling for near full asking price.
I'm always very sceptical of sort of regional differences in property values, again, sort of skewing the figures, because I know if you remember during COVID, for instance, people were moving out of town to the country because they were being confined to home, so they wanted more space, etc., etc. And we had sort of reports of country estate agents, their property sales going up double. But that was probably 2 properties to 4 properties, whereas in London it would probably be 30 to 60 if it was the same percentage. So you have to be very careful of these stats, don't you? And it's very difficult to get a comprehensive picture of what is actually happening in the market.
Yeah, it's a very different market right now because a single office estate agency would typically carry around 40 stock. And right now that I speak to lots of them, they've got 80. So it's a lot of mouths to feed. It's a lot of clients to keep happy with viewings and feedback and everything else. But the concern is that the buyers just aren't there in the same numbers. So then what becomes their strategy? Is it to lower the price? Is it to take the property off the market and remarket in the spring? You know, lots of options available to them. But the reality is the buyers are holding back. And in my view, they can't be holding back because of their lack of ability to borrow money or the cost to borrow money. That all seems broadly much better than it was 2 years ago. So it then comes down to, I think, confidence. And that's really where the market's struggling most at the moment.
I think, again, you hit on another subject there, the availability of money. If I've read the market right, I think the availability of mortgage funds is fairly free at the moment, is it?
It's getting much better, yeah. So if you rewind 10 years ago, there weren't interest-only mortgages. Now most people can get an interest-only mortgage. You can get capital interest repayment mortgages at much higher loan to values now than you could 10 years ago. So the ability for a first-time buyer or a home mover to borrow money now should be a lot easier than it was a decade ago.
Okay. So if we again turn to the upcoming budget and the scare stories we've had about capital gains tax, about increases in stamp duty, I've often thought that in these difficult times that we've had since probably 2010, I've often wondered whether the ability to be able to sell your home and make whatever profit you wish become tax-free. I've often wondered whether that's really coming to an end, whether it's sustainable. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we're in a situation where the government have already committed to closing what they call a black hole, and that has to come from taxes. In their view, the only taxes available to them is CGT, IHT, stamp duty, income tax, obviously, which they said they wouldn't do, but they may freeze the thresholds. So paying capital gains on residential property is something that we're not used to in our generation. Could it come in? Yeah, I think it probably could, especially at certain values.
See, I know if you have this sort of conversation out of the industry with the general public, they'll say, no, government would never dare do that. Yeah, it's most unfair, this, that, and the other. But actually, you could moderate the effect by saying, well, look, what you're allowed is perhaps a 5% per annum increase in the value of your property based on the value, based on an earlier valuation, perhaps for council tax or whatever else. You can have a 5% per annum. Anything over that, then you're going to be paying a sliding scale of tax on.
Yeah, which I think would cover most people.
Yeah.
What it wouldn't do, I guess, is cover people who were purchasing their first property, which is a bit of a wreck, spending a bit of cash on it, and then selling it quite quickly to move on to the next one. You might make more than 5%, or you hope you would, unless you can write off some of the money you spend on material and things.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, I think with a bit of innovative thinking, you could make that work, and it would provide a lot of money. And again, I've often said that I really think stamp duty should be with the seller rather than the buyer. One, because for the buyer, especially young people, it's not a fundable expense. You've got to find the cash for that as well as your big deposit. And for the people that say that that's unfair, no, because whatever stamp duty you pay, you can be allowed to deduct the stamp duty you paid going in if you've had the property for some time. So again, I think it's workable. It just needs some fairly clever thought.
I think if you pulled 100 potential buyers from the high street and asked the question, what's stopping you buying right now? Cost will certainly be a factor, and stamp duty is one of those costs. Stamp duty is very, very outdated. I think it was introduced initially as a tax on very expensive homes. That clearly right now isn't the case. The stamp duty threshold is less than the average property price. So we have to do something as a country to reform this. And whatever action is taken, if it's putting it onto the seller, or whether it's scrapping it altogether up to £500,000 and having some sort of structure where your stamp duty is paid monthly, any of those actions will dramatically improve activity. And with improved activity and volume in the market comes much greater VAT receipts from lawyers, estate agents, mortgage brokers, removals and everything else.
Refurbishments, yeah, sure. Look, you also mentioned earlier that the market below £1 million, or probably, £500,000 to £1 million, it's fairly buoyant. Is that going to continue? And what are we going to see as we get closer to the budget date?
I think we will see quite a strong market, because through all of our experience, whether it be financial crisis, Brexit, re-election, COVID, whatever it was, the market never disappeared. It just got a bit slower, paused, there were pent-up demand, and it came back extremely resilient. There's nothing to suggest that a budget in autumn at a time that's, comparably not as big as some of the previous things we've already come through shouldn't be any different. So I'm not as nervous about this as a lot of commentators and people in the press might say. I think that we could be in a rather fortunate situation that we will have a couple of quiet weeks on the lead up to the budget, because that always happens.
Yes.
But we always get a quiet period in December for new inquiries. Well, if this goes the way I think it might go, we could have a really bumper December, January, because people, I think there's two things that the Chancellor might do. She might implement changes immediately, and she might implement changes at the start of the financial year. Either way round, I think generates a lot of interest quite quickly. If it's end of the financial year, existing transactions may need to be delayed, potentially to benefit from it. New transactions, they'll want it done really quickly, obviously. But depends on which side of the coin you're on, because if you're buying, you may want to push this through at a certain date, depending on the benefit. But if you're selling and CGT's coming in, you'll certainly want to sell before that date. So I hope the two don't contradict each other, which they might.
Yeah. I mean, interestingly enough, they're walking a bit of a tightrope, because they're wanting to have this aspiration to build 1.5 million homes by the end of Parliament. What they mustn't forget is that 1.5 million homes have to be sold. Now, whether it's selling to a housing association, an individual, an institutional investor, whatever, They've got to be sold, money's got to be found, and the appetite for purchase has got to be there. And if they kill the appetite to purchase by overtaxing the industry, we've got a problem, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is a danger here that if they get anywhere near that figure, which I don't think they will, by the way, but if they get anywhere near that figure, we are going to find ourselves in a position where the only ones buying are the big investment houses, and their exposure to UK housing stock will become so great that they have some sort of control over the prices in which people pay for rents. And that's quite a scary thought. At the moment, the market is very fragmented, all the way from somebody who bought their first home, rented it out and bought somewhere else, right the way up to BlackRock, who own thousands of units. I think your small 1, 2, 3 unit developer or investor will start to disappear over the course of this time. They won't be the ones buying these new builds.
Well, I think that started already, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. It has. Yeah, they're offloading their stock, and this, by the way, represents about a third of the market. So it is a huge amount of stock we're talking about. The 1.5 million homes coming into this will be, without doubt, homes for first-time buyers. They have to be. Although I don't quite know how that works with developers who need to make a profit, because they need to build houses on the same site that they're going to make a greater margin on. But these are what the institutions want. They want smaller units that they can rent out to people.
Okay. Chris, just final thought then, your thoughts on the prospects for the market over the next 12 months?
Yeah, I've heard lots of people talking about a market crash. And whilst I can sit here and say there are certain parts of the market that are certainly dropping in value, the market has never crashed. I can't see it ever crashing. The word crash for me means a very sharp decrease in volume and value. I don't know what percentage of the market's traded on any one particular day, but it's nowhere near a significant percentage that would make an impact. I think the prices will pull back for sure, and that we're starting to see that already. That will come out in the data in 3 to 6 months' time, depending on what happens in the budget. But that's no bad thing. Let's just make things more affordable for more people.
Yeah.
And then we go some way to sorting our housing issue.
If we make it more affordable and expand the market, it can only do the whole market good. I think where the government have made a mistake in the past is demonising one part of the market or criticising it without looking at the effect across the board. Because if you can't get into the market, the top of the market can't move upwards or downwards. It's a very complex and delicate market, isn't it? Overall. And I agree with you. I'm not sure that a crash as we know it will come again. I think we're a lot more sophisticated in terms of understanding our finance and our products these days. And the young people are far more aware than ever they were in my day about property purchases. So let's hope for a good future.
Absolutely.
All right. Chris Barry, Business Development Director of Thomas Legal, thank you very much for coming in and letting us have the benefit of your thoughts. I'm very grateful. Thank you for watching. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Matters.